The clinking of ice in a crystal glass is the only sound that dares to challenge the hushed reverence of New York's most exclusive restaurant. In this world, fortunes are made and shattered over a single course. Tonight, the man at the corner table, Damien Rochester, is about to close the biggest deal of his life. He is a king in a bespoke suit, a titan of industry whose name is a synonym for power. But when a tiny, intricate piece of his past breaks a cufflink holding a memory, he thought he'd buried his multi-billion-dollar empire suddenly hinges on the steady hands of a waitress. A waitress whose face stirs a ghost. In his memory, a ghost he spent 15 years trying to forget. He has no idea that in fixing this small golden link, she is about to mend a fracture that runs right through the heart of his entire history. The air in the Gilded Sparrow was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a carefully curated atmosphere designed to make the absurdly wealthy feel at home while reminding everyone else of their place. Damien Rochester, seated at his usual corner table with its panoramic view of the twinkling city lights, felt perfectly at home. He exuded an aura of calm, predatory stillness, his grey eyes scanning the room with the detached analysis of a man who didn't just own buildings, but entire skylines. Across from him sat Mr. Kenji Tanaka, the elder statesman of a Japanese tech conglomerate, a man whose partnership would solidify Rochester Ventures' dominance in the Asian market for the next decade. The deal was 99% done. The lawyers had papered it, the accountants had blessed it, and all that remained was this final dinner, a ritual of trust and mutual respect, sealed over seared scallops and a bottle of 1982 Petrus. Your vision for AI integration is aggressive, Rochester-san, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice a soft baritone. But compelling. Aggressive is the only way to lead Kenji, Damien replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He gestured with his hand to emphasize the point, and in that small movement, disaster struck. A faint ping echoed on the marble floor, a sound no one else heard, but one Damien felt instantly in his wrist. He glanced down. The left cuff of his custom-tailored Tom Ford shirt was undone. The cufflink, a unique gear-shaped piece made of gold and onyx, was gone. Panic, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, lanced through him. It wasn't about the monetary value. That cufflink was one of only 2 ever made, a relic from another life, a promise. He subtly excused himself, his mind racing. A momentary distraction, Kenji. Please enjoy the wine. Damien's gaze swept the floor under the table. His 6'3" frame felt impossibly large as he tried to discreetly search without alarming his guest. He saw nothing but the polished Italian marble and the expensive shoes of his dining partner. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The cufflink wasn't just an accessory. It was his touchstone, the last physical piece of his past with Robert Croft. As he straightened up, a quiet voice spoke beside him. "Sir, is everything all right?" He turned to see a waitress. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that held a weary depth. Her uniform was crisp, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. Her name tag read Isabella. She held a small silver tray, but her attention was entirely on him. "It's nothing," Damien said, his voice clipped with annoyance. The interruption was unwelcome, but Isabella's gaze wasn't on his face. It was on the floor near the leg of the adjacent unoccupied table. With a grace that seemed out of place amidst the stiff formality of the restaurant, she bent down. When she rose, the missing gold and onyx cufflink was resting in the palm of her hand. "Is this what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice soft. Relief washed over Damien so intensely it almost made him dizzy. He snatched it from her hand, perhaps a little too quickly. "Yes," "Thank you." He turned back to his cuff, fumbling with the intricate mechanism. But as he tried to reattach it, he realized the problem. A tiny pin within the locking mechanism had bent at a precise, awkward angle. It wouldn't close. Frustration, hot and sharp, surged through him. Of all the nights. "The internal locking pin is bent," Isabella said, her voice still quiet yet confident. "It happens with these custom leverbacks if they're struck at the right angle. The pressure displaces the retaining spring." Damien froze. He stared at her, truly looked at her for the first time. How could a waitress possibly know the specific terminology for a bespoke cufflink mechanism? He saw not just a tired server, but a flicker of something else in her eyes, a deep, innate understanding of mechanics. She seemed to sense his disbelief. "My father. He used to work with things like this. Small, intricate machines." She hesitated, a shadow passing over her features. "May I?" He was Damien Rochester. He didn't let strangers, especially serving staff, touch his personal belongings. His security detail, seated discreetly near the entrance, was probably already tensing up. But the deal with Tanaka was hanging in the balance, and his composure was fraying. He looked from her steady, capable hands to her serious face and made a split-second decision. He unfastened the remaining cufflink and handed her both pieces. "Be quick," he ordered, his tone harsher than he intended. Isabella didn't flinch. She took the pieces and moved to the soft light of a nearby service station. Damien watched, mesmerized. She didn't use any tools. Instead, she used the edge of the other cufflink's post, applying precise, controlled pressure to the bent pin. She worked with a jeweler's focus, her movements economical and certain. It was a delicate dance of leverage and pressure. After no more than 30 seconds, she brought it back. "Try it now," she said. He took the cufflink. It felt whole again. He slid it through the buttonholes of his shirt, and the mechanism clicked shut with a satisfying, familiar firmness. Perfect. He looked at her, a new kind of respect dawning in his eyes. "How did you—" "He taught me to see how things fit together," she said vaguely, her eyes distant for a moment, before snapping back to the present. "Will there be anything else, sir?" The professional mask was back on. She was just a waitress again. But Damien couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. He reached into his wallet, pulling out all the cash he had, with $100 bills. Far more than a simple tip. "For your trouble," he said, pressing the bills into her hand. Isabella's eyes widened slightly at the amount, a brief flash of her own reality breaking through her composure. It was more than she made in 3 shifts. "Sir, I can't. I insist," Damien said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He needed to end the interaction to get back to Tanaka to close his deal. She folded the money carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. "Thank you, sir." She gave a small, formal nod and disappeared back into the orchestrated chaos of the restaurant. Damien sat back down, refastening his repaired cufflink. He was composed again, the master of his universe. "A small wardrobe malfunction," he said smoothly to Mr. Tanaka, who simply smiled and nodded. The rest of the dinner proceeded flawlessly. The contracts were verbally confirmed with a handshake. The future of Rochester Ventures was secure. But as Damien was chauffeured home through the glittering canyons of Manhattan in his Rolls-Royce Phantom, his mind wasn't on the multi-billion-dollar deal. It was on the cufflink in his hand and the impossible knowledge in a young waitress's eyes. And on a name he hadn't dared to speak aloud in 15 years, Robert Croft. The man who had designed that very cufflink with him. The man who had been his best friend, his business partner, and ultimately his greatest betrayer. The next morning, Damien's office on the 80th floor of the Rochester Tower felt less like a seat of power and more like a gilded cage. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air, and casting a harsh glare on the sprawling city below. But the view brought him no comfort. The repaired Cufflink sat on the polished surface of his massive obsidian desk, a golden accusation. He picked it up, turning it over and over. The gear design wasn't just aesthetic, it was a symbol. He and Robert Croft had designed it together in their tiny, cramped garage office, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief that they were going to change the world. Each gear tooth represented one of their founding principles: innovation, integrity, partnership, trust. Trust. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He leaned back in his leather chair, the past flooding back with an unwelcome clarity. He saw Robert, not the ghost that haunted him, but the man he had been, brilliant, endlessly optimistic, with a laugh that could fill any room, and a mind that saw patterns and solutions where others saw only chaos. Robert was the engineering genius. Damien was the visionary with the ruthless business acumen. Together they founded Apex Innovations. They were unstoppable. Their magnum opus was to be the Helios Project, a revolutionary quantum encryption system, poised to make all current data security obsolete. It was their ticket to the major leagues. They poured everything into it, their time, their money, and the last of their investors' capital. And then came the crash. One Monday morning, they arrived to find the system wiped. Not just the data, but the core programming, the backups, everything. Simultaneously, their corporate accounts were emptied. $2 million gone. The digital trail, expertly convoluted, led directly to an offshore account opened in Robert Croft's name. Damien remembered the confrontation, the shock on Robert's face, his frantic, desperate denials. "Damien, you have to believe me. I don't know how this happened. Someone framed me." But the evidence was overwhelming. The wiped servers, the money trail, the fact that Robert was the only other person with the master keys. Damien, shattered and enraged by what felt like the ultimate betrayal, had cut him off. "You were my brother, Robert." Damien had snarled the words, tearing from his throat. "And you destroyed us. Get out. I never want to see your face again." Robert had looked at him, his eyes filled with a terrifying, hollow despair. He'd simply turned and walked away. A week later, he and his family were gone. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mountain of debt and the wreckage of Damien's trust. Damien, left with nothing, had clawed his way back from the abyss, fueled by a cold, hard fury. He built Rochester Ventures on the ashes of Apex Innovations, swearing to never trust anyone so completely ever again. And he had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. But the success was hollow, built on a foundation of bitterness. Now a waitress who knew how to fix the cufflink, Robert had designed a girl who talked about her father, teaching her about small, intricate machines. It couldn't be a coincidence. But what did it mean, miles away in a cramped second-floor apartment in Queens that smelled of old books and chamomile tea? Isabella Croft counted the $500 for the 10th time. It was a small fortune. It was enough to cover her mother's expensive medication for the next 2 months, with a little left over for the overdue electricity bill. Her mother, Catherine Croft, sat in a worn armchair by the window, a thick shawl wrapped around her frail shoulders. Her once bright eyes were often clouded now, her memory a flickering candle in the wind, but there were moments of startling lucidity. "You're late tonight, Izzy," Catherine murmured, her voice thin. "Was it busy?" "Very busy, Mum?" Isabella said, tucking the money into a ceramic jar labeled "Rainy Day." But it was a good night. She didn't mention the Billionaire. She didn't mention the cufflink. Seeing it had felt like a physical blow. She'd recognized the design instantly, A smaller silver version of it, a pendant, was tucked away in her own jewelry box, the last birthday gift her father ever gave her. She had been 10 years old when their world fell apart. She remembered the shouting, the tears, her father's haunted face. She remembered packing their lives into 2 suitcases in the middle of the night. She remembered her father saying, "Damien doesn't understand. But someday the truth will come out." They had moved from a comfortable suburban house to a series of ever smaller apartments. Her father, a brilliant engineer, blacklisted and broken, could only find menial work. The strain had crushed him. He died of a heart attack just 5 years later, a man defeated by a world that no longer saw his genius, only his alleged failure. Catherine's health had declined ever since. Isabella had harbored a quiet, burning resentment for Damien Rochester her entire life. He was the man who had cast her father aside, the man whose face appeared in business magazines lauded as a lone genius, while her own family withered in his shadow. Curiosity and a deep instinctual need for justice warred within her. She went to her bedroom and pulled an old, dusty shoebox from under her bed. Inside were her father's most treasured possessions. Old photos, his favorite fountain pen, a few technical medals from college, and a small leather-bound journal. She opened it. The pages were filled with her father's elegant, precise handwriting diagrams and complex equations. It was mostly indecipherable to her. But then she found what she was looking for. She flipped through the old photos until she found one. It was taken on a sunny day, 2 men in their late 20s, standing with their arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. They were standing in front of a sign that read, "Apex Innovations, the future is now." One was her father, Robert Croft, his face alight with hope. The other, younger and with a fire in his eyes she'd seen a glimmer of last night, was unmistakably Damien Rochester. Staring at the photo, at the easy camaraderie between the 2 men, a cold resolve settled over her. The man in the restaurant hadn't just been a billionaire with a broken cufflink. He was the architect of her family's ruin. And for the sake of her father's memory and her mother's peace, she had to understand why. The money he'd given her felt less like a tip and more like a down payment on a debt he didn't even know he owed. For 2 days, Damien Rochester was a man possessed. He was short-tempered with his bored, dismissive in his meetings, and a phantom in his own life. The image of the waitress Isabella was superimposed over everything. Her steady hands, her knowing eyes, the way she had spoken of her father. He couldn't reconcile the image of Robert Croft, the thief and betrayer with a daughter who possessed such quiet dignity, and a skill so specific it was like a genetic echo. Coincidences of this magnitude didn't exist in his world. His world was one of cause and effect, of actions and consequences. On Wednesday afternoon, he buzzed his executive assistant, Genevieve. Genevieve Porter was a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed and terrifyingly efficient. She had been with him for 10 years and knew him better than he knew himself, possessing an almost telepathic ability to anticipate his needs. "Genevieve, come in," he said into the intercom, his voice taut. She entered silently, a tablet in her hand. "Sir, the revised proposal for the Singapore acquisition is ready for your review." "Forget the proposal," Damien said, waving a hand dismissively. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I have a task for you. It is personal, and it is to be handled with the utmost discretion. No one else is to know. Am I clear?" "Crystal, sir," she replied, her expression unchanging. "On Monday night, I was at the Gilded Sparrow. A waitress assisted me. Her name tag said, Isabella. I want you to find out everything there is to know about her." Genevieve's eyebrow arched a fraction of an inch, the only sign of her surprise. "A waitress, sir." "Don't question it, Genevieve. Just do it," he said, his tone sharp. "I want her address, her work, history, her family situation, everything. I want a complete file on my desk by morning." He rationalized it to himself and to her. She showed an unusual mechanical aptitude. "I'm considering offering her a position. An apprenticeship, perhaps. Something in R&D. It was a plausible lie, but they both knew it was more than that. Genevieve simply nodded. "I'll have it for you by 9 a.m. She turned and left, closing the door with a soft click. Damien was left alone, with his thoughts, the gears of his mind grinding as furiously as the ones on his cufflink. Genevieve was better than her word. At 8:45 a.m. the next morning, a slim, unmarked folder was placed on Damien's desk. He waited until she had left the room before opening it. The first page was a summary. Subject: Isabella Croft, age 25, address 2317, 35th Avenue, Apt 2B, Queens, NY, occupation, waitress, the Gilded Sparrow, 3 years. Previous employment includes various service industry jobs. Education: New York City, College of Technology, associate's degree in mechanical engineering technology. Dropped out due to financial hardship. GPA 3.9. Damien's breath hitched. Croft. The name stared up at him from the page, a confirmation of his deepest suspicions. He felt a strange, dizzying mix of vindication and dread. He read on his heart, hammering against his ribs. Family. Mother Catherine Croft, age 58, unemployed. History of chronic illness. Father Robert Croft, deceased. The word deceased hit him with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't known. In his anger and bitterness, he had never once tried to find out what had happened to Robert. He had assumed he was living off the stolen money somewhere, laughing at him. The thought that he was dead, that he had been for years, sent a wave of cold through Damien's body. The file contained more details. A copy of Isabella's birth certificate listing Robert Croft as her father. A summary of their financial history since the Apex collapse, a bleak picture of mounting debt, medical bills, and a slow slide into poverty. It even included Robert's death certificate. Cause of death: myocardial infarction. Age 42. Damien slumped back in his chair, the file trembling in his hands. 42. Robert had died at 42. A man who had been so full of life, so vibrant. Damien was now 45 himself. The narrative he had constructed for 15 years, the story of a cunning thief living a life of leisure on stolen funds, crumbled into dust. The reality was so much sadder, so much more pathetic. Robert hadn't run off to paradise. He had withered away in obscurity and poverty. And his daughter, a brilliant young woman with a 3.9 GPA in engineering, was serving overpriced food to men like him just to keep a roof over her sick mother's head. The guilt was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He had not just cut a man out of his life, he had condemned a family. His righteous anger, the fuel that had powered his ambition for so long, suddenly felt like a petty, childish rage. He looked at the cufflink on his desk. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal, it was a tombstone. At that same moment, in the quiet of her Queen's apartment, Isabella was also looking for answers. She had pulled out her father's journal again, determined to find something, anything that could vindicate him. Most of it was still a foreign language of code and schematics, but she pored over it, page by page, her engineering studies, giving her a sliver of insight. She focused on the last few entries dated just before the collapse. They were frantic, filled with notes about the Helios project. She saw diagrams of firewalls and data pathways. Then she found a page with a series of notations that seemed different. System vulnerability detected, not in primary architecture, but in the secondary diagnostic port. Marcus keeps insisting on using it for remote progress checks. I've told him it's a security risk. He says I'm paranoid. Marcus. The name leaped out at her. She vaguely remembered a cousin Marcus who used to visit Damien at the old office, a man who always seemed to be smiling, but whose eyes never smiled with him. Below the note was another more chilling entry. Ran a trace on the diagnostic port access logs. An external encrypted connection was established last night at 02:17. Masked IP routed through 3 continents, but the initial handshake protocol, it's a proprietary algorithm Damien and I developed. Only 3 people know it. Me, Damien, and Marcus. Isabella's blood ran cold. Her father hadn't been framed by a stranger. He suspected it was someone on the inside, someone trusted. She turned the page. The final entry was short, almost illegible, scrawled in a shaky hand. It's all gone. The money, the project. Damien thinks it was me. He won't listen. God help me, he won't listen. I made a ghost backup, offline, failsafe, key Catherine's, song 99998. A wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath, crashed over Isabella. It was here, the proof, or at least the beginning of it. Catherine's, song 1998. She knew exactly what that meant. Her mother's favorite song was Vincent by Don McLean. The year she and her father married was 1998. It wasn't just a password. It was a piece of their life, a key hidden in a memory. She closed the journal, her hands shaking. She had what she needed, the name of a second suspect, and the hint of a hidden backup. She looked at the photograph of her father and Damien Rochester, their faces full of youthful dreams. "I'm coming for the truth, Dad," she whispered to the faded image. "For you." She now had a name to go with her righteous anger, Marcus. And she knew her next move was not to hide, but to confront the man who had built an empire on her father's grave. Armed with the information from the journal, Isabella felt a surge of nervous energy. She couldn't just call a man like Damien Rochester. She needed to face him. Taking an unpaid day off a significant financial hit, she put on the most professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress and a worn but clean blazer. She took a deep breath, clutched her father's journal to her chest, and took the subway to Manhattan. Standing before the monolithic Rochester Tower was intimidating. The building itself seemed to sneer at her, a monument to the man who had crushed her family. Taking a shaky breath, she walked through the revolving doors into a lobby of cavernous marble and steel. "I'm here to see Damien Rochester," she told the receptionist, her voice betraying none of the terror she felt. The woman looked her up and down, her expression a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Isabella said, her chin held high. "But if you tell him it's Isabella Croft, he'll see me." The gamble paid off. The receptionist made a call, her eyes widening as she listened. A moment later she hung up. "His assistant Genevieve will be right down." Genevieve Porter was as sleek and formidable as the building itself. She assessed Isabella with a cool, neutral gaze. "Mr. Rochester will see you. Follow me." The elevator ride to the 80th floor was a silent, stomach-churning ascent into the heavens. When the doors opened, Isabella was led into an office so large and opulent it felt like a different world. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Damien Rochester. "Leave us, Genevieve," he said, his voice low and resonant. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone. The silence stretched thick with 15 years of unspoken history. He turned to face her. His eyes were not angry, as she had expected, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. He had the file on his desk. He knew who she was. "Isabella Croft," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't know about your father. I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected apology threw her off balance, but she wouldn't be swayed. "Are you," she challenged, her voice trembling slightly, "are you sorry you destroyed him first?" Damien flinched as if struck. "What you think you know is not the whole story. Your father, he betrayed me. He stole everything we had built." "No." Isabella shot back, stepping forward and placing the journal on his desk with a thud. "He was betrayed, and you were too blind to see it." She opened it to the pages she had marked. "My father knew there was a security breach. He wrote about it right here. He suspected someone else, someone with inside knowledge, someone named Marcus." At the mention of the name, a subtle but definite change came over Damien. His expression hardened, a flicker of disbelief, warring with a new, dawning horror. "Marcus," he repeated the name, sounding foreign on his tongue. "My cousin Marcus Thorne. That's absurd. Marcus has been my head of operations for 12 years. He's family." "He was there back then, wasn't he?" Isabella pressed her voice, gaining strength. "My father wrote that only 3 people knew a specific protocol. You, him, and Marcus. He wrote that Marcus was using a secondary port against his advice." Damien stared at the journal, at the familiar, elegant script of his former friend. He wanted to dismiss it. He wanted to call it a lie, a fabrication from a desperate man. But the detail about the diagnostic port, it was an obscure technical point, something he hadn't thought about in years, but it was true. Marcus had insisted on it, for efficiency. "This doesn't prove anything," Damien said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It's just the ramblings of a guilty man trying to shift blame." "Then what about this?" Isabella said, her finger tracing the last desperate entry. "He wrote that he made a fail-safe backup, an offline ghost copy of the entire Helios project. He even wrote down the key." Damien's world tilted on its axis. A backup. Robert had never mentioned a backup. If a copy of the project existed, it would change everything. It would mean that the most revolutionary technology of its time hadn't been destroyed, merely hidden. Before he could process this bombshell, the door to his office opened. Marcus Thorne strode in a confident smile on his face. He was a handsome man, silver at the temples, with the easy charm of a seasoned executive. "Damien, sorry to interrupt, but we need to—" He stopped short, seeing Isabella. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before being plastered back on. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a guest." Damien looked from Isabella's fierce, accusatory face to his cousin's smooth, practiced one. "Marcus, this is Isabella Croft, Robert Croft's daughter." Marcus's composure was flawless. He extended a hand to Isabella, his expression one of deep sympathy. "Miss Croft, I am so terribly sorry. I knew your father, a brilliant man. It was a tragedy what happened." Isabella refused to take his hand. She stared at him, her eyes boring into him. "Were you sorry when you framed him?" The smile vanished from Marcus's face, replaced by a look of offended confusion. I beg your pardon." He turned to Damien, laughing incredulously. "Damien, what is this? What is she talking about? She has a theory, Marcus." Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. He was watching his cousin's every micro-expression. "That you were the one who breached the Helios servers and stole the money." Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. "That's preposterous. It's insane, Damien. We all saw the evidence. The money trail led straight to Robert. Why would I destroy my own family's company? Why would I betray you?" He turned his gaze back to Isabella, his eyes now cold and hard. "I see what this is. This is a shakedown. The daughter of a thief shows up 15 years later with a sob story and a forged diary, hoping for a payday. Don't fall for it, Damien. She's playing on your history, on your guilt." His words were poison expertly crafted to prey on Damien's deepest insecurities. For a moment, Damien wavered. Marcus's version was simpler. It was the version he had believed for 15 years. But then he looked at Isabella, at the unshakable conviction in her eyes, a conviction that mirrored her father's on that last terrible day. And he looked at the journal. Robert's handwriting. Robert's voice crying out from the grave. "She says there's a backup, Marcus." Damien said, his eyes locked on his cousin. "An offline copy of Helios. If we find that we find the truth, we'll see the last access logs before the wipe. We'll see exactly which terminal gave the command." For the first time, a flicker of genuine panic crossed Marcus Thorne's face. It was there for only a second, a brief widening of the eyes, a tightening of the jaw, but Damien saw it. In that split second, the foundation of his trust in his cousin cracked. "A backup," Marcus scoffed, recovering quickly. "A fantasy, a lie to drag this out. Damien, get her out of here. She's trespassing. Call security." "No," Damien said, his voice like ice. I think we'll look for this backup instead." He looked at Isabella. "This key. Catherine's song 9998. What does it mean?" "It's not a password for a file," Isabella explained, her voice steady. "I think it's a location, a physical one. My mother's name is Catherine. Her favorite song is Vincent, which she always called her Starry, Starry Night song. And 1998 is the year they were married." She paused, connecting the dots herself. "There was an old storage unit they rented when they got married, at a place called Starry Night Storage." The three of them stood in the silent office, the weight of the past and the future hanging in the air. For Damien, it was a moment of terrible clarity. For Isabella, it was the brink of vindication. And for Marcus, it was the beginning of the end. The drive to Starry Night Storage, a faded, sprawling facility in an industrial part of New Jersey, was the longest hour of Damien Rochester's life. He sat in the back of his Maybach with Isabella beside him and Genevieve in the passenger seat. He had left Marcus in his office, ordering him not to leave, with two of his most trusted security guards posted outside the door. The confrontation had been ugly, Marcus sputtering with indignant rage, but Damien's command had been absolute. The trust was broken. Now he needed proof. Isabella was silent, clutching the journal. She had given Genevieve the address, a place she hadn't thought about in over a decade. The facility's sign was a peeling mural of Van Gogh's masterpiece, a sad mockery of its name. "Are you sure about this?" Damien asked, his voice low. "It could be nothing." "My father wasn't a liar," Isabella replied, simply, her gaze fixed out the window. Genevieve had already worked her magic. Using the old lease agreements she'd miraculously unearthed from city archives, she had determined the unit number C98. She had also arranged for a court order to be expedited, giving them legal access just in case. They found Unit C98 at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor that smelled of dust and mildew. The lock was old and rusted. Damien's security chief, a burly ex-Mossad agent named Ben, snapped it open with a pair of bolt cutters. With a groan of protesting metal, Ben rolled up the door. The air that wafted out was musty, the smell of time itself. The unit was filled with forgotten things. Old furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping giants, boxes of books, a child's bicycle. It was a tomb of a former life, the life Damien had unknowingly helped to bury. Isabella stepped inside her flashlight beam, cutting through the gloom. "It has to be here somewhere." They searched for 20 minutes, a frantic, dusty excavation. Damien felt a growing sense of despair. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it was a fantasy. Then Isabella spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Here, tucked away behind a stack of old vinyl records, was a heavy military-grade Pelican case. On the side, scrawled in her father's handwriting, was one word: Helios. Damien's breath caught in his throat. Ben carried the case out to the light. It was sealed with a combination lock. "The key," Damien said, looking at Isabella. "Catherine Song 9998. Isabella's hands trembled as she worked the dial. She had to guess at the format. After 2 failed attempts, she tried a sequence based on the song's release year and their wedding date. 721998. With a soft click, the lock sprang open. Damien lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a set of files, but a hardened, standalone server tower, an offline air-gapped machine. It was a perfect isolated snapshot of their entire system, taken the night before the crash. "Get it back to the office," Damien commanded Ben. "Set it up in the main conference room. I want our top 3 network engineers there. No one else enters or leaves. And get Marcus. Bring him to the conference room." The atmosphere in the Rochester Ventures conference room was electric with tension. The server tower sat on the long mahogany table, connected to a series of monitors. The engineers, 3 of the best minds in the country, worked feverishly. Marcus Thorne stood at one end of the room, flanked by security, his face a pale, sweating mask of bravado. Isabella stood beside Damien, her posture rigid. "We're in," the lead engineer announced. "The OS is intact. It's a perfect mirror of the original Apex network." "The master log files," Damien ordered, his voice like stone. "Find the system activity for the night before the crash, specifically any access through the secondary diagnostic port." Lines of code scrolled rapidly down the main screen. The engineers typed their faces, illuminated by the glow of the monitors. The room was utterly silent, except for the frantic clicking of keys. "Got it," the engineer said. "Access to the core programming via the diagnostic port at 02:17 a.m. The command sequence initiated a full system wipe set to execute at 08:00 a.m. Simultaneously, it triggered an automated wire transfer of all liquid assets. "The originating terminal," Damien demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Trace it." "The IP was masked, routed through servers in Russia and Brazil," the engineer reported. But the initial hardware handshake. The ghost copy logged the MAC address of the originating network card. "It's a unique identifier. It can't be faked." Damien felt Isabella's hand grip his arm. This was it. The engineer typed a final command. A string of hexadecimal code appeared on the screen. Cross-referencing the address with the Apex hardware inventory logs from 2010. He paused, his eyes widening. "I have a match." He looked up, not at Damien, but at Marcus. The network card was assigned to the terminal in the office of the Chief Operating Officer. Marcus Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight. The digital ghost in the machine had spoken, and its voice was irrefutable. Marcus Thorne crumpled. The bravado, the charm, the lies. It all fell away, revealing the petty, jealous man beneath. "He was getting all the credit," he choked out, his voice a pathetic whine. "It was always Robert and Damien. I was there too. I worked just as hard. It was my idea to streamline the code. I just wanted my share. I never thought he would die." Damien looked at his cousin, the man he had trusted, the man he had welcomed into his home, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. The betrayal he thought he had suffered 15 years ago was nothing compared to this. This was a rot that had been festering at the very heart of his life. "Get him out of my sight," Damien said, his voice devoid of all emotion. As security led a sobbing Marcus Thorne from the room, Damien turned to Isabella. Her face was streaked with silent tears, not of sorrow, but of profound, earth-shattering relief. Her father's name was cleared. His ghost could finally rest. Damien looked from her face to the server tower, the legacy of his greatest friend. He hadn't just recovered a lost project. He had recovered the truth, and in doing so, he had incurred a debt that no amount of money could ever repay. In the weeks that followed, the story of Marcus Thorne's deception detonated like a bomb in the quiet, gilded corridors of the financial world. It was a sordid tale of greed, jealousy, and familial betrayal that graced the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. Damien Rochester, however, navigated the fallout not with defensive anger, but with the cold, surgical precision of a man on a mission of atonement. His legal team descended upon Marcus's assets with the fury of a righteous storm, clawing back every stolen dollar, every ill-gotten gain, and ensuring Marcus would face the full consequences of his actions. But for Damien, these public victories were hollow. The real reckoning was happening within the silent, cavernous spaces of his own soul. The Rochester Tower, once a symbol of his indomitable will, now felt like a mausoleum. He'd sit in his office for hours, the skyline a panorama of achievements that now felt tainted. He saw Robert's face everywhere in the reflection of the glass in the schematics for new projects, in the gear-shaped logo of his own company. Guilt was a physical presence, a heavy cloak he couldn't shrug off. Sleep offered little respite, filled with dreams of that final ugly confrontation, of Robert's eyes filled with a despair he had been too proud and too wounded to acknowledge. The ruthless titan of industry was gone, replaced by a haunted man searching for a path back to the light. His first public step was monumental. He called a press conference, standing before a sea of reporters and flashing cameras, not as a victim of his cousin's treachery, but as a man admitting his own profound failure. He didn't read from a statement. He spoke from the heart, his voice raw and steady. For 15 years, he began his gaze sweeping across the room. The world and I myself have believed a lie. We believed that Apex Innovations failed because of the greed of my partner, Robert Croft. Today, I am here to set the record straight. Robert Croft was a man of unparalleled genius and unimpeachable integrity. He was the victim of a malicious and calculated frame orchestrated by my own cousin, Marcus Thorne. A wave of murmurs rippled through the press corps. The failure was not Robert's. Damien continued, his voice cracking with emotion for the first time. The failure was mine. I was a young man, betrayed not by my friend, but by my own pride. My anger made me blind to the truth that was right in front of me. I failed my best friend. I did not stand by him, and that is a mistake I will carry with me for the rest of my days. He then announced the immediate formation of the Robert Croft Foundation for Ethical Engineering, endowing it with an initial $100 million. This foundation, he declared, will seek out and support brilliant minds who, like Robert, believe that the purpose of innovation is not profit, but the betterment of humanity. He was publicly dismantling the myth of his own solitary genius and rebuilding, brick by painful brick, the legacy of the man he had wronged. While Damien was facing the world, Isabella was quietly rebuilding hers. The first check from the trust Damien had established was for an amount so staggering it seemed like a typo. Within a week, she and her mother had moved from the cramped Queen's apartment to a beautiful light-filled brownstone in Park Slope. It had a small garden, something her mother hadn't had in 15 years, and a state-of-the-art medical suite on the ground floor. For the first time since childhood, the constant grinding pressure of poverty was gone. Isabella watched as her mother, freed from the shadow of her husband's perceived dishonor and supported by the best care, began to truly heal. One afternoon, Isabella found her in the garden, humming softly as she potted geraniums, her face turned to the sun. The sight was so full of simple, peaceful joy that it brought tears to Isabella's eyes. This was the peace Damien's atonement had brought. For herself, the transition was disorienting. She spent her days in libraries and online devouring textbooks on mechanical and quantum engineering, reconnecting with the part of herself she'd been forced to sacrifice. A month after the revelation, Damien came to their new home. He didn't arrive in his Maybach, but in a simple town car, and he stood on their doorstep, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man asking for permission to enter. Isabella led him to the sunroom where her mother was reading. Damien stood before Catherine, his hands clenched at his sides. He had rehearsed this 1,000 times, but the words still felt inadequate. "Catherine," he began, his voice low. "There are no words to undo what was done. I can only say that I am sorry. I failed him. Robert was my brother, and I let him down in the worst possible way. I let my anger and my pride blind me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it." Catherine looked up from her book, her gaze clear and steady. She studied his face, seeing not the titan of industry, but the young man who used to eat pizza on their couch and argue with her husband about the future of technology. She reached out a frail hand and patted the seat next to her. When he sat, she placed her hand over his. "Robert never hated you, Damien," she whispered, her voice stronger than he'd heard it in years. "He was just heartbroken that you couldn't see the truth. He always believed that one day you would." Her forgiveness was a quiet, simple gift, but for Damien it felt like the sun breaking through a storm that had raged for 15 years. Later, Damien and Isabella walked along the riverfront in Brooklyn Bridge Park. The city skyline they had once viewed from opposite ends of existence was now a shared landscape. "The foundation is a start," Damien said, his gaze on the water, "and the trust will ensure your family's security forever. It's the very least I owe him." "It's more than we ever expected," Isabella said softly. "It's given my mother peace. It's given me a chance to breathe." She stopped walking and looked at him, her expression serious. "But what about you? All those years you built an entire empire fueled by anger at my father. That engine is gone now. What are you going to build with?" Her question cut straight to the core of his existential crisis. "I don't know." He admitted the words, feeling foreign and raw. "I have the Helios project. The ghost copy is perfect. The technology. It's still decades ahead of anything else. It could be worth hundreds of billions. It could change the world." "My father didn't build it for the money," Isabella countered gently. "He built it to protect people, to keep secrets safe. He worried about it falling into the wrong hands. He believed in its power for good." Damien looked at her, at the fierce intelligence and unwavering integrity that was a perfect echo of her father. An idea sparked in his mind, an idea born not of profit or ambition, but of purpose, a way to build something new on the rubble of the old. "You're right," he said, turning to face her fully. "The Croft Foundation can fund the next generation of engineers. But Helios, it needs more than funding. It needs a guardian, a conscience, someone to steer it to ensure it's used the way Robert intended. Someone with the technical knowledge to understand its complexities and the moral compass to guide its power." He took a breath, making the biggest pitch of his life. "I don't want to offer you a job, Isabella. That's not what this is. I want to offer you a partnership. Let's start a new company. We'll call it Croft Rochester Industries. You will lead the Helios division, not as an employee, but as an equal partner. You'll have complete autonomy, the final say on its application. We won't build it to make me richer. We'll build it to honor him. We'll do it right this time. Together." Isabella stared at him, the scope of his offer leaving her breathless. It was a restoration on a scale she couldn't have imagined. It was a chance to step out of the shadows of a painful history and into the light of her own vast potential to pick up the torch her father had been forced to drop. After a long moment of stunned silence, a slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine, unburdened smile he had ever seen from her. It was like watching the sun rise. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, with a conviction that sealed their new pact. "I think my father would have liked that very much." They stood there for a long moment, the wind from the river whipping around them. They were not a billionaire and a waitress, but two survivors of a shared history, forever bound by a story of loss, betrayal, and now a shared and hopeful future. The past could not be rewritten, but on the firm foundation of a mended cufflink and a resurrected truth, they could finally begin to build something that would last. And so a broken cufflink in a high-end restaurant didn't just unravel a 15-year-old lie, it rewove the fabric of two families torn apart by betrayal. Damien Rochester, a man who had everything, discovered the one thing he was missing: the truth. And Isabella Croft, a woman who had lost almost everything, reclaimed the most important thing of all her father's honor. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the biggest empires are built on the most fragile foundations, and that true restoration isn't about money or power, but about mending the broken trusts that define our lives. It's a new beginning, one built not on anger, but on a legacy of integrity. What did you think of Damien's path to redemption? And what do you believe the future holds for him and Isabella as they embark on this new venture together? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of lost deception and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Your support helps us bring these narratives to life. Thank you for listening.